The following is a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. For more information, please visit our website at dallasgenealogy.com.
All right, so here's why we're here today, is to hear Paul Beaty on finding a great-grandfather with DNA. Paul is currently working with the Morgan Company and has a lot of experience working with DNA. I'm going to let Paul give a little more background. He is a member of the African American Genealogy Society as well as the Dallas Genealogical Society, and he's been working with several groups on putting together his ancestry using DNA. And so at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to let Paul bring his screen up.
Perfect. And you see
Thank
that.
you, Paul. We can see that.
I would just ask everybody else to, out of courtesy, please mute during the presentation.
All right. So thank you so much for that introduction. So just to give you a little brief background about myself. I work for JP Morgan Chase, and I work in our sales department. And you know, I'm just a regular average Joe, average guy who enjoys studying, enjoy doing genealogy work. And, you know, I've had a lot of fun with it. And yeah, you know, so I'm real open. You can always ask me any questions. Listed on the front page, you'll find that my phone number. So if you throughout this presentation, if you have questions at a later date, you need to contact me. Please don't hesitate to call me. I'm always openly and readily available. If I don't answer the phone, just leave a message and I'll connect with you at a later date. One slight correction. It's actually my grandfather that I was able to reconnect with. And, you know, when we get into this presentation, you'll find that it's real simplistic presentation. It's not anything that's going to be too high level. It's not too elementary. And the reason why I organized it like this was because I really didn't have a real good understanding of my audience as a whole. And so I know some people, especially when you get into DNA, it can be a little, what's the word I'm looking for, challenging, as well as, you know, overbearing for some people. And so I wanted to make this as real simplistic as possible. And so if you wanted to get into it a little bit more in detail, we can always do that at a later date. Okay. All right. All right. So again, what we're going from an overview perspective, what we're going to cover is, for the most part, is we're going to understand genealogy from an African American perspective. And we I think Susan kind of talked about this a little earlier. This is my own personal case study. And so what you're going to see is a portion anyway of my life history and how it unfolded and how DNA played a magnificent part in it. I'm a firm believer that you can, and you'll see this throughout the presentation, you can do one without the other, but DNA really is a game changer. It has truly enhanced my life. It's given others within my life even more purpose and understanding as it relates to genealogy and from an historical perspective also. And so we'll get into that even more. So again, let's get started. You know, this is the month of February, but for me and my family, we celebrate on a daily basis the fact that we have school teachers in our family. We have writers, songwriters, landowners. And these are things that I think many times when you talk about African Americans, we really, you know, we really don't just stop and really look at what we have in our family. And so when we're doing research or when we're recording things, we need to notate these and we got to celebrate them. And so again, we celebrate the fact that we own land, we own property, homes. The fact that in the early 1900s, many people were not able to vote, but we have people in our family who paid for us to vote. who voted, who participated in the political process. And that needs to be noted. We have ministers, we have husbands and wives, we have fathers, we have proven athletes. This, you'll see a picture here. And again, this is on my father's side, and we're not here to talk about that, but Zelmo Beatty, some of you all may be familiar with him. You may not be, but he was played for the Utah Jazz. And as a young boy, I didn't know this until I started doing genealogy research. I was not privy to a lot of this information. And so once I started asking questions from other family members, things just really start unfolding. As we look through history and we look at some of the challenges, you'll see two pictures here. One, the picture in the bottom right is my great grandfather, who was a school teacher, and he taught in a small town called Jasper, Texas. There were challenges for African Americans in the 1900s. Dilapidated schools, segregation. I mean, the list just goes on and on, but it wasn't something that prevented us from continuing to press forward. As I look through my research today, I think these are some of the things that helped me to continue to propel forward and to drive the internal drive within me to make sure I tell the story not only for myself, but for my children. Getting into the understanding of why I wanted to find my grandfather was because of my mother. My mother is the one who got me into DNA, or not DNA, genealogy. Verna Lee Stephens, and I put dash Beaty because she married my father. She was born Verna Lee Stephens. I think one of the things in the African-American community, or not even just African-Americans, period. One of the things that we do here in America, around the world, we live in such a male chauvinistic society where sometimes the women just really, they lose focus, or we just forget about who they were and who their birth names are, or what their birth names are. And so I always make it a point to make sure that as it relates to women, that we point that out and recognize that lineage. And so my mother, she gave me the ability. She always told me, she said, son, you need to know who you are, where you came from, because it's very important. And so obviously this is me as a little bitty boy. I only have maybe like 2 baby pictures. And so I hate this picture anyway, because I need to get it restored. But this is my only baby picture. And so she told me as a young boy, she says, when you were born, you were a free baby. Now, some of you all may know what that means. Some of you don't, but I'm going to explain it to you. A free baby means in 1973, when you were poor as we were, dirt poor, you had to go to what we call Parkland Hospital to be delivered. And so my mother didn't pay for me to be delivered. So she always called me, you're a free baby. And so that's my story. When she took me home to East Dallas, to a small little apartment. And believe it or not, these apartments still exist today. I drove by the other day. At the time, they were not $7.95 a month, but she took me home to 5508 Tremont Avenue in East Dallas. When I went down this road, I found it to be very interesting and moving for the most part, simply because I knew nothing about this as a child, but talking to my mother and other family members, a lot of great memories were formed here. As a child, she always told me, she says, your dad, I'm your dad. Who my dad was, who she was. And I always had a good sense of that. My parents split up young. And so I really didn't have a great relationship with my dad throughout the years. And so I really never had any real male leadership in my family structure. Only the leadership that I had for the most part was from my mother, my grandmother, and other men in the community for the most part. But in the household, I really never had any real strong male leadership. And so as I got older, I began to ask more questions. And obviously she couldn't answer them. And you'll see through the next phase here, she'll talk about, I'll list some of the questions that I asked, but a lot of information was not necessarily passed to her. And so, as many of you on this particular call today know, you actually have to become a genealogy FBI CIA agent in order to find some of the information that you need that's not public records. And so that's exactly what I became. I became an FBI agent for genealogy. And it's been pretty successful for me. I've been able to uncover a lot of information that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to uncover based on books and going to a library. So I lived, when I grew up, the better part of my life at 3918 Copeland. As you can see on this picture, there's nothing there. It's a raw piece of land. Again, I stated that we were extremely poor, so poor that the reason why this land is vacant today is because the house was demolished because it was not livable. And so, again, a lot of great memories here at this particular address. If we move on, just kind of talk through this. My mother's story, she was always able to tell me, son, who your father was. She remarried. She could tell me who her mother was. And as you can see, this is a little diagram just kind of giving you her genealogy on her mother's side. But she could never tell me who her father was. And again, as a young boy, I always wanted to know, who are the males in my family and why can't I know who they are? And so she would tell me that, well, your grandmother, which I call mother, her name is Obie Giddings, or Stevens. Her married name is Giddings, Obie. And so she would always tell me, and I love her dearly, rest her soul, but she would always, tell me that her mother would not tell her anything as it relates to her father. She would always say that, those people don't care anything about you. The story behind how my mother came to be was quite interesting. My grandmother had relations with a man who was married and had a child. And unfortunately, during that particular time in the 50s, that's not something that you were, quote unquote, was honorable or wanted to share with everybody. And so, he did not own up to his responsibility. After having a conversation with him, he just, he realized that was the wrong decision to make. But, again, those are things that we uncover and we live with it. And, we've developed an excellent relationship since then. And so you'll see as we go on some of the pictures and things of that nature of how things unfolded. I would ask my mom, I says, tell me more about my dad. Where's your dad? And why aren't these men in my life? Why? Some of the things you all may have heard from your family members is, that I heard from my mother and my grandmother. Boy, if you don't leave me alone with all of these questions, people don't like to be put on front or put on center street to ask and be asked a lot of questions about who they are, where they're coming from, and why they did things. And, I was always told, that's part of my problem. I ask too many questions. And so I'm always, with DNA and with genealogy, the most important thing to understand is that you got to ask questions. They're going to be tough questions. They're going to be hard questions. But at the end of the day, you got to ask them so that you can make sure that you're telling the story, especially in the African American community. We have a lot of hidden secrets. And I say the African American community, it's all communities. But specifically, I know that in the African American community, we have a lot of secrets that we don't want to share. And the story has to be told. And we got to get this information out so that the next generation is not suffering from the perspective of not knowing who they are, not knowing who their fathers are, not knowing who their grandparents and their parents are. As of 2010, when I really began to unfold and do more research on my family tree, you'll see where on my father's side in the top sector, I was able to build that out relatively easy, just simply because there's so much information out there. He knows so much, his sisters know so much about the family. And I was able to really build that out. So I was able to build that out without any real adversity. Of course, now there was some challenges, but nothing near as on my mother's side. And so if you look in the bottom right, the bottom sector of that, you'll see my mother's side of the family. Only her mother's side and not my father's side, not her father's side. And so that was a great challenge for me because she didn't know who her father was. Matter of fact, I think she only met him maybe one time based on an interview that I did with her. And that one time that she met him, I think when she said she was really young, she didn't know where he lived. Again, her mother wouldn't tell her anything about him. And so I didn't have a whole lot of information to go on when I started looking for him. And so the quest began, and the quest started out with, "Mom, what is your dad's name?" And she says, "Son, your grandfather's name is John Henry Thomas." I'm like, great, I got a good start. So I started some research, and as you can see, I put in John Henry Thomas, and so that is a very, very common name. As you can see, over 5.3 million searches came up under just a generic search for John Henry Thomas. I narrowed it down, and then it brought it down to 1.5 million. Still almost like searching for a needle in a haystack. And so I told her, I says, "Mom, I can't find your granddad based on this information. What else do you know?" She said, "Well, mother," which is again my grandmother, "wouldn't tell me anything. She told me that, those people didn't want to have anything to do with you. If they did, they would have come found you by now." And that's so far from the truth, just so that you know. But my grandmother would always tell me, she says, not my grandmother, my mother would always tell me, she says, "Baby, if you want to go and find my daddy and his people, all you got to do is go up to Frank Street. Everybody knows them on Frank Street." Now, some of you may know where Frank Street is, and some of you may not. Frank Street is in South Dallas, near Spring, Lago, in that area. If you don't know anything about Dallas or in this area, this is considered a really, really rough part of the town. Again, I told you I grew up poor. And so to go up on Frank Street and just, I'm saying in my mind, "Mom, are you serious? You want me to just go up to Frank Street and just start asking people, do you know John Henry Thomas?" Keep in mind, this is in the 2000s. And so John Henry Thomas was born in the 30s. And so he wasn't born on this street, but the family lived on this street. And so I'm saying to myself, no way in the world I'm going to Frank Street in South Dallas with my prim and proper self and walk up and down Frank Street talking about, "Do you know the Thomas family?" And so I says, "Put your thinking hat on. You got a college degree. You can do this." And so I put my thinking hat on, and I lived at 3918 Copeland. After doing more research, I found that the Thomas family lived at 3829 Frank Street, which was only 2 minutes away from where I lived. And so I found that quite interesting. Right in my own backyard, my family house, my grandfather's family home was just right around the corner from where I grew up. And so, not even necessarily where I grew up, where my mother lived, where my grandmother lived. And I'm saying to myself, hey, it doesn't make sense. I mean, here I'm looking for this man my whole life, and he's right around the corner. Why couldn't we figure this out? Well, we couldn't figure it out because of family secrets. We couldn't figure it out because everybody wanted to control the family story. And yet a young boy such as myself suffering because I had no male leadership, nobody to give me the guidance that I needed to move forward. Granted, I got a lot of information from my mother, and she taught me a lot of great things, but as a young male, you want that male leadership. And so I went out. How did I find this information? I went out to DCAT. DCAT has a whole lot of information about families, about names. And so when you're going into DCAT and you're looking at property addresses, it actually lists the owner for each one of these, for each house. And so it was a daunting process. I had to go through each house on DCAT and look at the owner's history to find out who the Thomases were that owned a house within a certain period. And so I was hoping and praying and saying, you know what, I hope that at some point, they didn't sell the house within the allotted time frame so that I can find the Thomas family on the rolls. And sure enough, I did. And that's how I found the actual physical address. Once I found the physical address, found the Thomases on that particular street, I then went to Dallas Morning News and looked at the obituary section to see if I can find any Thomases that lived in Dallas within this particular time period. Again, I had a name. The lady that you're looking at is mainly Britain. Britain is her maiden name, just so that you know. She married a Thomas, which is my great grandfather's wife. And so I got this picture by looking through the obituary, finding her name, finding the actual funeral home, contacting the funeral home for the obituary. Granted, the obituary was not listed there at the funeral home, but I asked the funeral home, where could I find the obituary? They sent me to the person who manages all of their obituaries and produced them. And the lady, she told me to come by. It was late one evening. I thought that it was kind of in a rough neighborhood too, but she gave me the information, and it was down here from there. I was able to find out who her husband was, who her children were, who my grandfather's siblings were. As you know, there's a lot of great information just within the obituaries within itself. And so, again, this was not enough. I was able to find John Henry Thomas, and I already knew who the name was, but I didn't have a picture. But I did. Now this was able to reveal more information, more leads for me to really go and dig deeper. And so I turned to DNA because I was not able to find any additional information on Ancestry, any other site or anything of that nature about the family as a whole, because nobody was publicizing the family information, at least not that I could find. Remember, I was doing some serious digging. When I tell you I put the FBI and the CIA hat on, I put it on, and I was really, really looking, but I couldn't find anything. And so I turned to DNA. I'd already taken African American DNA, African Ancestry DNA tests to really understand more about, from an ethnicity perspective, where my lineage came from, and from a tribal perspective, and was able to reconnect with a tribe back in Africa. But that's not what I wanted. Again, I wanted that male connection and to feel my genealogy or my family tree so that I could have a complete family tree. So I turned to Ancestry. I turned to 23andMe. I turned to FTDNA. These are popular names. Skip, Dr. Rick Kittles, all of these particular people. I would call them up directly and say, hey, listen, this is the challenge that I'm dealing with. Help me to fix this stuff. And they helped me. So I went to ancestry.com and I took a DNA test. And in that DNA test, again, you have three types of DNA tests. You have a DNA test that will test your Y chromosome. The Y chromosome basically looks at your father's father, and supposedly goes back to, I think, like 500 million years or 500,000 years or something of that nature. But anyway, it's consistent across the father's line. It doesn't change. The Y chromosome DNA test. And you can take this test through Ancestry. You can take this test any one of your major genealogy groups. I've taken some of the ones with some of the no-name ones, but I would stick with the main ones. African Ancestry, 23andMe, FTDNA. I believe FTDNA was the first one out there. But again, the Y chromosome tests your father's father's father. And I took that test and it revealed quite a bit of information. I also took the mitochondrial DNA test, which tests your mother's 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 mother's, same concept on the father side with the Y, but it focuses solely on the mother only. And I took this test, and it also revealed quite a bit. And you have what they call an autosomal DNA test, which looks at the entire DNA structure, which is a small percentage what we're looking at, but it looks at the entire DNA structure, and it pulls in both sides, both the mother and the father side. And I was able to, again, find a lot of great information. Some of the information I was able to find, well, before I get into that, let me just kind of talk through, because I think this is really important. there are sites out there. There are people, thousands of people who are looking and using DNA as a tool to help them find family members, find family, find parents. Don't hesitate to do this. I know that there's a lot of negativity around DNA. A lot of people don't want to use DNA. I mean, we have more skeptic people out here in the world than you can even remotely imagine. But I promise you, I could not have found, well, maybe I could have at some point, but in a short period of time anyway, is what I would consider. I could not have found my grandfather without using DNA. You know, I look at some of these articles, and as you can see, S.A. Simmons, she states, I don't know if that's a he or she, but states, it took 2 years in searching via Ancestry DNA. However, my search is finally done. I have found my biological father. God is good all the time. You know, I find that really interesting. You know, this person is going throughout life, and they don't look young in the top left corner, but they've longed to find their biological parents. It doesn't mean that they didn't have family or didn't have somebody to support them, but they longed to have that father or that mother connection. And you'll look over in the top right corner where you'll see Kathy Stewart Tracy. She actually talks about finding her biological father. You know, if you look down, Nene Gerald, posting for the first time, you know, she's adopted and wanting to find her connection. You know, there are a lot of people out there, and I would employ each and every last one of you that are helping yourself and helping others. You know, try to find somebody that you can help outside of your family, because you may be able to be a resource to them that they just don't have. A lot of people out here don't have the resources or the accessibility to libraries. And when I say libraries, I mean, I'm serious. There are people in other countries who don't have access to this information, and they're looking for their families, and you could be a huge help. But January 6, 2015 changed my life. I got my DNA results back from Ancestry.com, and all types of names started popping up. You know, all types of things actually started going through my mind too. The first person that popped up was Shanitra. And when I saw her picture, I says, wow, I actually got some beautiful cousins out there. And so I sent her a private message, and I introduced myself. I told her that we shared DNA with one another and that we were related. And, you know, could you, kind of help me understand how we were related? Granted, I told you I'd already done my genealogy on both my father's side. So I knew really good whether or not I would know if we were related on that side of the family. And then I did the genealogy research on my mother's side, so I would know if we were related on that side. So I took a chance, and I was like, this gotta be on my mother's father's side. And sure enough, it was. But guess what? She didn't know anything about that side of the family. She didn't even know anything about the Thomas side of the family. Granted, she knew that she was related to the Thomases, but she didn't know anything about it. And the most she could really tell me about that side was the fact that they came from a little small town outside of Dallas called Terrell. And I knew Terrell was very important because my mother told me that her family lived in Terrell for a short period of time. And so I says, so there could maybe be some connection. So anyway, I kept looking and kept digging. And sure enough, January 6th, same day, I found this lady who was also doing some research on the Thomas's family, Miss Wynn. As you can see, I put the transcript to our conversation, part of the transcript anyway, to our conversation. And I'd like to just kind of go through it with you. I introduced myself, and obviously it was early in the morning. I was doing some research. I don't know what's up with this early in the morning thing. Anyway, it was early in the morning. I was doing some research, and I was wondering if she had any information on John Henry Thomas. And again, I never would have found this information unless it was through my DNA connection. I messaged her on Ancestry, and I asked her if she knew John Henry Thomas, and I wanted to know, so she was like, what type of information are you looking for? I wanted to know who he was, who his wives were. Did he still live in California? All of that kind of good stuff. Was he still living? Granted, because I'm 40 years old, and I'm like, surely this man has passed on. My mom, she's older now. I just want to know who he is. And so I began to ask more and more questions. And she says, well, how are you related to Mr. Thomas? And so I told her, I says, well, I'm the grandson. And she says, well, I talked to his brother, Tommy Thomas. And I was like, oh, well, I know this must be a real lead now, because I'm looking at the obituary, remember, because I got it from Evergreen. I'm like, okay, so this is the real deal. And so she said that she would, she told me, she said she'd have him, she says she would have him to call me, or she says I can call him. So I called him and I began to talk to him, and he began to tell me all of this information about his brother. And as you can see, I was just in complete joy. So much joy. I gave all of my information, phone numbers, address, fax numbers, office numbers, everything you can think of to try to get in contact with him. And sure enough, July 17th, 2015, 2:09 p.m. in Dallas, Texas, at the Dallas Union Station, my grandfather got on a train and came to Dallas to meet my mother for the very first time. She was 60 years old. He was 83 years old. And when I first saw him, this was funny, 83-year-old man now, he says, hey, I can run. And he began to run toward me. And I was like, oh my goodness, please don't let this 83-year-old man fall running toward me. And so I thought it was really, really interesting. I got a chance to take a picture with my grandfather at the age of 42. It was really, really amazing. Every time I think about this moment, I get teary-eyed. Anyway, that's how I found John Henry Thomas. And I was able to complete my family tree based on that. And I can say with confidence that as a 47-year-old man, I am really, really grateful to say that I can now trace all of my lines back on both sides, great, and even three greats throughout my whole family tree. And that's almost unheard of today. And so this was possible all through DNA. I encourage each and every last one of you, again, to find someone, to help someone find their family members who are looking. Even if you know all of your family members, go and find someone, because you can be a breath of fresh air. Help them to read a book. Help them, encourage them to take a DNA test. Don't fall victim to all of the skeptics about DNA, because DNA can unravel and unveil a lot of different things within families. With that being the case, I'd like to open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Paul. This is Susan. What a compelling story, and talk about persistence and how it pays off. Thank you. So now, please, if you have a question, I see we've had several questions running through the chat, but now is your chance to talk directly with Paul. So we're going to let you unmute if you have a question.
So, Paul, I take it you found everybody through your autosomal DNA or mitochondrial?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Okay, we had earlier a question about DCAD. Paul, we put a little bit of that information in the chat. Can you explain how you used the Dallas Central Appraisal District?
Thank you. Thank you. I should have, working in corporate America, you learn that acronyms are like our friend, but they're enemies, right? So DCAD is a representation of the Dallas County Appraisal District. And what that means is it lists, if you have a home or if you own property in a particular county, every county has them. If you own property in a county, it lists all of the detailed information about a particular residence. So it lists the owner, it lists the property taxes, it lists previous owners. And so throughout my research, remember, one of the leads that I had was the fact that my family could be found on Frank Street. So the challenge was, well, the good thing about it is Frank Street is super long, but unlike Ancestry, remember when I had over 1.5 million searches to pop up, unlike Frank Street didn't have 1.5 million homes.
Yeah.
But I was able to go through each one of those homes records to look at the ownership of each one of them to find the Thomases so that I can actually narrow down my family. Does that answer your question, hopefully?
Well, I'm familiar with DCAD, and you're absolutely right. It's an amazing resource for us, especially for
And it's free.
And it's free. That these are property, these are public records. And you should look for a central, Paul's right, central appraisal districts are in most counties. And so you should look for a central appraisal district in just about any county you're researching. So excellent resource. I'm glad you brought that up.
Free,
so
and it's online.
Online, yes. So
Susan,
yes.
does that also include rural or farmland? Or is it just city land?
It depends on your county.
But yes, Gene, it does include any kind of property in that county.
Any
Right.
property in the county?
Yes.
Okay, so if it's farmland somewhere or another, you can find out who has owned it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure if that's online, but I know that every county has it.
Yeah. And so it's for businesses as well. So if you have a business that your family member may have been involved in, may have worked for, may have owned, you can search. I mean, it just depends on who owns the property. So,
That's right.
So whoever asked that question originally, do you have any further questions?
So I have a question.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So Paul, this is Alan. So once you found your grandfather, did you continue to do tests through him and find out his story? Is that coming up next?
It is. It is. I'm actually waiting on him to return the test.
Okay.
I think so. I don't know if I got a cousin on this line, on that line that is on. I don't know. Chris, are you on?
I am on, sir.
All right. So I thought it was quite interesting. So Chris actually pinged me, is like, is this you that's doing the presentation? And I'm like, yeah, it's me. And so Chris has been on me about making sure that I get Grandpa Thomas to take the DNA test, because that we're looking for that line to unravel some other things, Alvin. And so that is coming very, very soon.
Since Paul did his DNA test back in, was it 2010 with Ancestry?
Mm-hmm.
Ancestry no longer does the Y-DNA test. So
Oh.
if you want Y-DNA, you have to go, and you want matches, you've got to go to Family Tree DNA. They're the only ones that do Y and mitochondrial.
Interesting.
This is Nate. This kind of ties in with some questions I have about that. Paul, I guess you did your Y-DNA test. What information did that actually give you when you did that?
So, okay. So you have to, please forgive me because sometimes I'll get a little confused. Okay. And so I almost told you about the actual chromosome stuff. And so it gave me enough data so that during this particular time, and again, I hadn't done the digging like I needed to, but it gave me the information so that I can download all of the DNA information so that I can upload it into other tools like GEDmatch, which has another great deal of information that's out there so that you can connect with other family members. Again, I think the information that is downloaded in regards to the actual DNA is more so along the lines of the autosomal. I do know that it separates it out, so that, GEDMITCH gives you the ability to separate it out. And so, so it downloads all of the marker information that's associated with the DNA testing.
I
So
think
Paul, what does your mother think about all of this? What was her response?
You know, again, you know, she initially told me, she says, you're asking too many questions. You're going to hurt some people's feelings, right? Unveiling secrets are not always necessarily a fun thing for people. And, you know, I'm her son. She loves me. You know, a mother's love is truly unconditional. And, you know, if she was on the call today, she's came down to the genealogy meeting for the African American when I did this particular presentation, and she was okay with it. She has her reservations, but she's okay with it. I think now, anyway. I think initially she was happy that she found her father and that kind of good stuff, but she just didn't like all of the questions being asked.
Yeah. So, but your persistence obviously paid a lot of persistence there.
I mean, I'm not going to quit. I mean, once I want to know the answer, and you know, I just believe this. Again, my philosophy is each and every last one of us are FBI and CIA genealogy agents. Yeah. And the FBI and the CIA will not quit. And I just believe that that's what we have to do. We cannot quit. Just because your mother or your father or your grandparents or your aunt or whoever won't give you the information, somebody will give you the information. And so either you can tell me, or Aunt Susan can tell me, or the next door neighbor can tell me. Somebody's going to tell me.
Sometimes it is the next door neighbor.
That's right.
Larry Webb, did you have a question or something you wanted to say?
Yes, I did. And Paul, thank you very much for the presentation. But a question has come up, and I've seen some posts in the past. And I you know, your father was still living, so that certainly helped. But how do you find someone through DNA when you have a break in either the Y chromosome or I hope I get this right, for the males, and the other one for the females? How do you jump that bridge and continue on?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So you're wanting to know, how do you find family members on your father's side as different, and your mother's side, and keep them separate? Is that what I'm understanding?
Partly,
okay.
But basically what I'm referring to is if I had known what I know today when my father was still alive, I would have had him do a DNA test. Had I known what I know today, I would have had my father-in-law do a DNA test. So that's the direction I'm trying to go, is how do I resurrect?
I got you. I understand you now. I completely understand you. Okay, so the good thing about you is that you're a man, right? So this is when the male chauvinistic side comes out of me, right? And so the good thing about it is, on the man side, the man can test both Y and the mitochondrion. Unlike the female, she can't test the Y. She can only test the mitochondrion. Okay, so for you, you have the ability to leverage both sides. The female has to reach out to one of her male relatives, like a brother or father or uncle or something of that nature, to test the Y chromosome. The good thing about the DNA process is that the Y chromosome does not change. So it's consistent over and over and over again. And so even with the same for the female, it's just that on the female, from a female's perspective, she can't test for the Y chromosome. And so when you test, you can actually now isolate that Y side and start doing specific targets for DNA or genealogy research based on the data that comes back as it relates to your Y chromosome. Does that make sense?
Yes, one final question. I just recently did a Y chromosome test coming from my maternal side of the family, the Jacksons. When I get that result back, will it also be applicable to tracing the Webb side of the family?
So the website. So tell me, is the website on your paternal or is the website on your maternal?
You're
muted,
muted.
Larry.
Need to unmute, Larry.
Pardon me. Yeah, the Webb side of the family is my father's side of the family. The Jackson side of the family is my mother's side of the family.
Okay.
And I recently had a Jackson cousin reach out to me to do a Y chromosome test on the Jackson side. She manages a Jackson DNA board.
No. So yeah, no. So your Y is only going to be for everything on your father's side.
Okay.
You don't have a Y on your mother's side. She has to have a male on her side to do that Y DNA test.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Regarding the DNA testing, I know that there are a lot of people, as you mentioned, that are very skeptical or have, especially in the African American community, we have trust issues.
That's the understatement.
Right. How did you approach your family members to encourage them to trust enough to get tested?
So I'm a very, very direct person. I just go directly to you and say, this is what I need done. I do it. Right. That doesn't work with everybody. A lot of times you have to do a lot of coaching, a lot of explaining. And, some of the males in my family still won't do it. Right. For various reasons. Right. I tell you about all these secrets. Right. We have more secrets than we're allowed. Right. And there's this running joke about men out there. I promise you, we were told to, you all know about the notches on the belts, right? If you don't know about the notches on the belt, you probably need to go look that up. And so men out there probably have God knows how many children. You probably know about Papa was a Rolling Stone, right? Well, if you know about that, then we don't want to tell that story because I may get all types of child support letters in the mail, So I'm a little skeptical, but I have to walk you through why we're doing this. We're not doing this for criminal reasons. We're not doing this for child support reason. If there is child support, so what? You need to take care of your children anyway, right? I mean, they still need to know who their families are. And if you don't take the test, one of your siblings are going to probably take the test and they're going to find out who their family members are. On my wife's side of the family, there's some stories that came out with one of my wife's first cousins has a sibling that she didn't know about. And she had to find out when she was an adult. That's not something that you want your children to find out when they're adults. You want them to find out when they're younger so that you can help them and mold them to understand the whole concept of family. And so these are the things that I do when I talk to men specifically about why to take the test. Women, for the most part, are a little bit more receptive. They understand the process. They don't have, quote unquote, any secrets to hide as it relates to being found per se by someone. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Catherine, I think you're muted, Catherine.
There. Okay. I'm curious about Legault Street. Is it near Lego Cemetery at all?
So I was like, what are you talking about? Lego. Lego.
That's
how we pronounce it. Lego. Lego Street. That's the street off. That's the street that connected Frank and Copeland.
Right.
And so I don't think there's a cemetery off of Lego. I could be totally wrong, but I don't remember there's a cemetery off of Lego.
Okay, because
this
is it down by the Dallas Fairgrounds at all?
Yes, Lego runs directly into the fairgrounds, and it runs all the way to Sighing Road. There are quite a few churches, but as I'm thinking about it through my mind, there's no cemetery off of Lego. Okay. Now, there may be something around.
I have been to a cemetery down there. Yeah, it was anyway.
Oakland.
Lincoln's not too far from there, Paul. Lincoln's not too far from there.
That's right.
Lincoln,
yeah.
That's off of Hatchard, or is it El Cefe now, or something of that nature. There are quite a few cemeteries around there. And so it very much may be, but not off of Lego though.
Okay.
Maybe off one of the cross streets or something like that.
Okay. Well, anyway, you say it runs into Sighing?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I have relatives back in the day. Yeah, back there. I was searching for my great-grandmother's sister's husband. Yeah, and he was buried in that cemetery. And Cantrell was his last name.
Interesting. And you know, let me say this, because I probably should not be so matter of fact in relations to that. I have seen cemeteries in some of the oddest places. So there very much could be a cemetery off of Lego. And I just don't know about it. I don't think so, but there very much could be a cemetery off of Lego, especially because there are several churches around there. And so there could be a church cemetery or something along those lines.
Can I jump in there about the cemetery? This is Barbara Ware. That whole piece of land there near Oakland Cemetery, near Lego Street, near the fairgrounds, all was part of the land grant that the Lego family got. So that was the Legos League, and that's why that name occurs in that neighborhood. I'm not sure exactly where Lego Cemetery is, but it's where the Lego family was buried. And it's not like right there near that street. And you probably can look up where that cemetery is on the DGS cemetery map that's on the DGS website, and there should be a link to position where that Lego cemetery is.
Thank you. And now I know how to say it, Lego. Thank you.
Well, Paul, you use maps very effectively, and I think it was very telling when you showed that where you grew up and where your maternal grandfather was so close. And that's where the use of maps really helps us understand things sometimes more clearly.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we definitely have to be able to utilize the tools that are at our fingertips. And you know, I mean, physically, if you're there, you know, it may seem like a long way, but as you can see, it was only like 2 minutes, and it really puts things into perspective when you're looking at it on a map or have a diagram to see. And so thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, it was very effective use. All right. Any additional questions?
This is Christopher Bryant. This is actually Paul's cousin.
Welcome.
I just want to give him credit because of the fact that I had something that he didn't have. I actually grew up knowing his great grandmother. So his great grandmother and my grandmother were sisters. So I grew up actually knowing this part of the family, but did not know that he was disconnected from the family. I have been doing genealogy. I was the nosy kid at the family reunion, asking questions, trying to figure out who was who, how everyone was connected. So I have a lot of those stories that he was needing, but I didn't know about him. And I recently, a few years ago, found him on Ancestry. And I asked him, I said, well, you're coming up as a high match. Who are you? And he said, oh, I'm connected to Mamie Thomas. And I said, wait, hold up. I know all of Aunt Mamie's kids. Who are you, where are you coming from? So that was a surprise to me to find him. But since then, we've connected on Facebook. We've tried to chat quite often. So I'm just happy to know and even know this background information behind the story of how he came to find us. Because now, if I would have known this, I would have been a huge resource for him and been able to give him all of this information that he worked so diligently trying to find.
Appreciate that. I appreciate it. And Chris, you have been a huge help. I can't say it enough. I mean, the number of love that I have received and that's been poured into me is just, I got to give a shout out to my grandfather's sister, Carolyn Thomas. She is a whip, but I love her dearly. I mean, anyway, we come from a very large family. And so you have to understand the whole dynamic and family structure of the Thomas family. And so a Britton family, all of them, anyway. Thank you, Chris, for that. Thank you.
Any final questions?
I have a question.
Okay. All right. Who?
I'm Larry.
Okay.
If you see me?
Yeah, well, we hear you.
Okay. I'm looking for some advice. I know who my great-grandfather is, and so on all the way down to my father. But DNA-wise, he and his younger brother, 7 years difference in age, don't match at all. And the younger brother's side of it is my third cousin. So I don't match my third cousin. How do I go about finding out a guy who probably passed away? Well, he passed away before I was born. So it was sometime in the 30s, 1930, Greene County, Pennsylvania area. And I know I need testing for everybody in the world, his downline particularly. But I put my raw DNA everywhere I can put it. And all I do is have matches on my maternal side rather than my father's side or grandfather's side. So any advice?
Sure. Are you okay with secrets?
Okay with what?
Secrets.
Yeah.
Okay. What I would strongly recommend for you is to start with the church and find where your grandparents or was your grandfather involved in church any?
Yeah, he was a Presbyterian in Western Pennsylvania in several counties.
Okay. And did he attend church with his mother?
That I don't know.
Okay. I would start with the church and I would find out all of the people who attended church with him. I do things a little unorthodox. So I don't want to say something that may offend someone on this call, but I'm just going to say that you may find, I would look at the churches. I would look at your neighbors. And I would strongly look at the church and I would strongly look at all of the neighbors that are associated with your family, that particular line.
Yeah.
And when I say that particular line, I would look at all of the males that's associated from the neighbor's perspective and the church perspective.
And I've also looked at death records, burial records in that part of the world, looking for maybe a lady who had died in childbirth and probably had, a husband who had 5 jobs and 5 kids and couldn't support a young child. And so somebody else lost 3 kids in a row, which is a case where he was adopted into, I believe, the family, first 3 kids died before the age of 4. And then he came along. And then there was another one died before the age of 6. And then my great uncle was born, 7 years difference total. And that's my third cousin's line. And so that's what I've been doing. I just, I've, trying to find all his downline and will you test and will you test? And I don't match any people on the Millikan side of the ledger, DNA wise at all. So,
And what?
Pardon me?
What DNA?
I started with Ancestor and I took Family Tree. So I've done Y and Autosomal.
Okay.
And I've got it everywhere. My raw data, and I hear from all kinds of people from all over Pennsylvania and beyond, and majority, almost 99% of them are from my mother's side of the family. The Millikan side, they just haven't tested for a long way back.
Have you encouraged others to test?
I have. Just about everybody I contact, but there's very few people that react to that are out there that I'll go after my great grandfather's downline, and a lot of those people, of course, because that was 1850, but they're just not interested, or they want to know if they're Irish or something. That's about it. So
well, maybe that's the ticket. So you're going to test them to tell them if they're Irish.
Yeah, more than likely they are. So I'm just looking for some advice. I've been doing this for about 7-8 years, just looking around. So
got you. Well, keep digging. Don't give up.
Appreciate
it. Susan?
Yes.
Just to follow up on Larry's question, and I thought that Paul's answer was great about the churches. So Larry, for Presbyterian churches, I think the website is P as in Paul, C as in Candy, USA.org, and that's the Presbyterian Church History Archive. So to Paul's point, once you figure out what the church is, you can look there and see what records are available.
Good tip.
Presbyterian happens to be one of the very few churches who maintains a lot of records.
Yeah, it differs across the denominations for certain.
Can you say that website again, please?
Yes, it's, did I go back? I'm not on mute. Okay, I think it's pcusa.org. Probably if you just go on Google and you put in Presbyterian Church History Archive, you'll get something. It doesn't mean that you can see it online, the records, but you can see like a library catalog entry, and they do have some things online, like pictures of the churches, which is, I was kind of reminded of when Paul was talking about churches. There's some nice pictures out there of some old churches, and maybe the only picture that exists now if the church isn't there anymore.
Yeah, and one of the things, just to kind of reiterate what you're talking about, within the Presbyterian Church, they actually send all of their information, like all of their members' information, directly to Presbyterian as a whole. So like their names, all of that information is there with Presbyterian. So there's a lot of information with Presbyterian.
All right. Any last questions? Well, Paul, thank you so much for sharing this with us. A few less secrets now, but we really appreciate a great presentation. Now, I think somebody asked if we have a handout. You did not have a handout. Is that correct? Okay.
This has been a production of the Dallas Genealogical Society. If you're already a member, thank you. If you're not a member, please consider joining now by going to dallasgenealogy.com and clicking on the membership tab. Your membership dues will help us support the genealogy section of the Dallas Public Library, and it will allow us to continue our education and preservation efforts.